My name is Melissa Figueroa. I am the press director for the Stein and Baraka campaign. We will have a short format of Dr. Stein and Mr. Baraka will be giving short opening comments, about 3 minutes each, and then we will open up the floor to questions. Any other questions, logistical questions from the press at this point? No? Okay, great. Then without further ado, I give you Dr. Stein and Dr. Baraka.
Thank you, Melissa. Go ahead.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, press, for coming out this morning. We have been on a real mission over the last month. Of course, Dr. Stein has been involved in this campaigning process for a lot more time than that. But what we want to make very clear today, and have been emphasizing over and over, is that our campaign is truly a people's campaign. As we have been moving across this country, we've had an opportunity to meet with people and to see conditions that people are attempting to try to transform. We have seen many of the struggles that people are attempting to try to address within the electoral process. People who understand that they have to build some kind of independent power, who now see this campaign as that possible instrument. So we have been inspired by what we have seen. We want to emphasize that we're going to continue with this process of attempting to build alternative power. We recognize that it's important for people to support this campaign, to vote. We want their votes. But we also recognize that it's important for people to understand that they have a choice. That they don't have to be locked into the false choices of two elite parties that have demonstrated that neither party represents the interests of the vast majority of the people of this country. So we're going to continue to build a powerful social movement, to connect up with the various social movements around this country. And that's why we found ourselves in places like North Dakota, because we are committed to standing shoulder to shoulder with people who are committed to real social justice. So that is really one of the main themes of this campaign, that we are building something that we believe will be long-lasting. We believe that 2016 represents a turning point in the politics of this country, that people are looking for an alternative, and they are really looking toward the Green Party. And there's a buzz out there that we believe that maybe the mainstream media may not be picking up. It may not be reflected at this point in the polls, but we have connected to that buzz, that we believe is a reality, and we're going to see that buzz being translated into more significant popular support as we go forward.
Thank you, Ajamu. And I'll just piggyback on those remarks. Part of what may not be picked up by the polls are what are considered the so-called unlikely voters, because most of the polls are looking at the usual, traditional likely voters, but we are talking, among others, to those who've really been locked out of the system, locked out of the economy, locked out of our education system, those in the communities where the schools are being closed, in the communities where there are no jobs, in the communities where young people are in debt due to pervasive, predatory college loan debt from which there really is no exit. So we are talking to those communities and giving them cause like they have not had in recent memory to actually come out and be a part of this political process. Recently, just yesterday, in fact, we were in the Austin neighborhood on the west side talking to the people in one of those communities, walking the streets, walking with members of that community who are struggling against the epidemic of violence, with 500 shooting deaths in Chicago just in 2016 alone. We were at the very site where Elijah Sims was shot on the street, talking with the neighbors who are afraid to come out. Speaking with one woman, an elder in the community who was sweeping the sidewalk could only do that at certain times of day, and her family was so scared about her being out there on the sidewalk. This is a community that's been locked out, which is clamoring for resources, for dignity, for respect, for schools. We visited one of the schools, in fact, that had been closed, and spoke to some of the kids out in front. We spoke to some of the community members who were desperate to find jobs, who were starting their own small businesses against all the odds. So this is the America in particular that we're talking to. And we see that America struggling here in Chicago, and we see it actually across the country. We called yesterday a reality tour in Chicago. We've done reality tours in many cities, recently in Baltimore as well. Ajamu will be going shortly to Baltimore to spend the night actually sleeping out with the homeless. Likewise, our time at in North Dakota with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe was very much in support of that community, of the indigenous tribes that are struggling for their human rights, to protect their historic lands and their sacred sites, and who are standing up not just for their water supply, but a water supply that is shared by 17 million people downstream in the Missouri River. And as you know, there's a warrant out for our arrest in North Dakota, but we think that those warrants are misdirected. Those warrants should be actually directed at the real criminals here, who are violating our water supplies, who are putting our climate at grave risk, and who are conducting a human rights abuse right now of the peaceful protesters, largely Native Americans, on whom they turned loose vicious attack dogs and used pepper spray in the faces of people who are standing up for basic human rights, for the water supply, and for the climate that we all depend on. And I'll just mention that there will be a day of national solidarity on September 13th that we encourage everyone to be a part of, standing up in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux, the indigenous tribes, and the many people of conscience from all over the world, actually, who are gathering at the Standing Rock Reservation. And with that, I think we'll open it up for your questions.
Given the national, perhaps international attention you've had over this arrest warrant, a lot of people will see this as a publicity stunt, using a spray can instead of simply just advocating for your cause and for whatever.
You know, it's interesting. I certainly didn't go there intending to engage in civil disobedience. I was asked by the people at the demonstration, and I was very moved to see them putting their lives on the line. They were locking down. They had just been attacked by dogs, pepper sprayed, their water supplies being put at risk. They're putting their bodies on the line for all of us. It's all of our water. The climate belongs to all of us. They're putting their bodies on the line. I felt like it was a very small way that I could, as a presidential candidate, lend the power of my campaign to support what they were doing. And what I wrote with that spray can was the usual candidate message of, I approve this message. That is that we must shut down this pipeline and not allow the desecration of the climate and of indigenous lands to go forward.
Do you intend to go back to North Dakota?
Yes, we do. We will go back to face our charges and to have our day in court, but we'll also go back, and again, the scheduling is the issue, but we will continue to support this struggle in every way. This is the new Keystone Pipeline, and actually the movement, the climate justice and indigenous justice movement that stopped the Keystone Pipeline is now mobilizing. I'm very gratified to say, because this is really a life and death struggle for the indigenous on the front line, but actually for all of us who depend on the water and the climate.
Do you plan to return, are you thinking that you'll return before the election or after? I know you said scheduling, but...
I'm hoping, to go back while this issue is really hanging in the balance. There is a legal ruling that will be announced today. The National Guard has been called out. Weaponized drones have just been legalized in North Dakota. So, there's a convergence of really serious issues here, of the fight for human rights, the fight for our climate, and the fight for our basic civil rights and civil liberties, which are also at stake as the climate struggle is being militarized. So this is something that all of us, I think, need to stay on and insist that we are respecting human rights, our constitutional rights, and a climate we can survive in.
Let me jump in real quick on this question. I think it's important to point out that one of the reasons why we were there is that solidarity statement is reflective of the principles of the Green Party and the principles of this campaign. So we almost compelled morally and politically to be there, standing with the people in this struggle. So that's important. Secondly, this, as Dr. Stein says, is not really about us. It's about that struggle that's taking place in that space. And even with all of that has happened with that struggle, there's still been a reluctance on the part of the mainstream media to pick up on what's happening there. And now with this very dangerous turn of events, with the National Guard being called out, and with this situation being militarized the way it is, it's very important that the people of this country understand the potential that we see for something really tragic happening in that place. So this is not about us, it's about that struggle. And if we can help to amplify that, then so be it. But we don't want the attention to be on our situation, because we're going to be all right.
Can you give us a...
Yeah, I will moderate the discussion. One more follow-up question from you, and then I'll take staff.
Take what?
I will take an order of questions.
After
I didn't realize they were...
Well, you can follow, yeah.
What indication have you that this has either helped or hurt your cause? Are you getting flooded with phone calls from potential supporters? There must have had some impact. The warrant.
Yes, it has certainly generated interest from the media, and that's been great because it's making people aware that they have another choice. And, you know, in an election where the unfavorable ratings and the level of distrust is off the charts, a recent poll showed 76% of American voters are clamoring for open debates so they can actually learn about their candidates. So it's coming at the right time. We're seeing an enormous amount of interest, you know, in things like our Facebook page, our press about this, our statements, our videos, our photos are all going viral. So there's enormous interest in this issue, and also there's enormous interest in a campaign that's actually on the ground. We're not holding, you know, $5,000 plate fundraisers in the Hamptons. We're out there sleeping with the homeless and, you know, supporting the struggles of Indigenous people.
Dr. Jill Stein, Americans are struggling to work, Americans are struggling to get an education and live the American dream. You have suggested that we need a New Deal. You have mentioned a Green Deal. What is a Green Deal and how can Americans benefit from it under your potential presidency?
Thank you. So we actually put the terms together and we call it a Green New Deal. So it's based on the New Deal that helped get us out of the Great Depression, out of this emergency jobs program. And essentially that's what we're calling for, an emergency jobs program, because most Americans are still in a state of economic emergency. Average wages right now are barely above the poverty level. The jobs that came back are low wage, part-time, temporary, insecure jobs. So most people are living kind of hand to mouth still, and an entire generation is locked into student debt. So we're calling for this Green New Deal to create an emergency jobs program, 20 million jobs, enough to put everyone back to work, as part of an emergency mobilization to transition to 100% clean renewable energy by 2030. That is a tall order, but it is the magnitude of a solution that's required by this crisis that is actually barreling down on us. And for those who don't think it's a crisis, I would say, well, where exactly do you think this is going? Every month now is setting a new world record for the month of that name. Fires up and down the West Coast, floods in Louisiana, heat waves, and predictions that we will see as much as a 9-foot sea level rise as soon as 2050. As a scientist, I pay attention to the science, and it can often take a while for the science to get translated into public discourse, but I can tell you that the leading studies now are bringing that day of reckoning closer and closer. The science tells us we need to have phased out fossil fuels by 2030, which is an economic bonanza. This is a jobs bonanza. This is a good thing. This is not a hardship. These are good jobs, and in fact, workers benefit more than anyone, because on the fossil fuel work line, whether you're in a refinery or you're driving a truck or you are at a frac site, your risk of dying on the job is 700% higher than the risk on any other job. These are very dangerous jobs, and that's just the the acute risks. The long-term risks from cancer and heart attacks and things like that are also very high and are not captured by that number. So we guarantee a just transition, particularly for the workers and the communities who are in harm's way right now. What the Green New Deal does is assure us of a just transition for those communities who are, most dependent on fossil fuels right now, and ensure us that everyone will have a good wage, living wage job in the Green New Deal. It pays for itself in health benefits alone. Fossil fuels cause 200,000 premature deaths every year. That is just the tip of the iceberg of sickness, which we take for granted because it's just part of the world we live in. But we don't have to be living with that incredible burden of illness, which is also bankrupting our healthcare system. Those savings alone are enough to pay the cost.
I would like to ask a follow-up then. In regards to that, since our current House and Senate is comprised of Democrats and Republicans, and if you are to be president, what powers are you prepared to implement should that House and Senate stop you from passing the Green Deal?
Great. So put it this way. If there is momentum to bring us into the White House, then there's a lot of momentum to also change the actions of the House and Senate. So there are a whole variety of down-ballot Green candidates, as well as progressives, who would come along if there was a really clear public mandate. But let me say one other thing. If we are in the White House, it will be the first time that we actually have an organizer-in-chief, not just a commander-in-chief, but an organizer-in-chief. Because when people are mobilized, there's no end to what we can do. It was everyday people who stopped the Keystone Pipeline, who prevented the privatization of the internet, both by the FCC and by Congress. When we're actually informed and empowered as voters to be the engine of our democracy, it should be we who are guiding the actions of our elected representatives, not the lobbyists, not the fossil fuel companies. So we will be engaging the bully pulpit in all of its potential power to engage everyday American voters to focus on that issue and then other issues one at a time as we need to move them forward. Thank you.
Okay. Governor Gary Johnson had a pretty significant flub yesterday on MSNBC when asked the question about Aleppo. What do you make of that? Is that someone who is maybe unprepared, or do you think it was just kind of a sleight of thought? What do you make of that when you saw that and when you heard that?
I guess what I would say, I would put it in probably a less significant category than what we hear from Donald Trump almost every day, the kinds of, outrageous statements that he makes. Donald Trump flip-flops faster than the eye can see. In 1 minute he's down in Mexico being conciliatory about the wall, about immigration. An hour later he's talking to a different constituency in Arizona about deporting millions of immigrants the minute they walk through, the minute he gets into the White House. So I think, when you can look at Hillary Clinton's actions as Secretary of State, doling out favors to Clinton Foundation donors. These are things that have far more consequences than Gary Johnson's flub. Whatever it says about him, I will leave it to the American people to pass their own judgments. But I'll say, in the scheme of things, it's relatively small change compared to the other outrageous things going on in this election.
Yeah. Chicago's in there.
I'm sorry. Given the widely perceived dislike of both major candidates, what does it say about your party that your numbers are still so low?
It says something very important. What it says is that the media needs to provide us the kinds of coverage that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have gotten. $4 billion for Donald Trump in free media. Hillary's had over $2 billion, and we've had almost zip. So it's actually rather remarkable. We are the only campaign that doesn't accept corporate money, that doesn't run on lobbyist money and super PACs. So this kind of campaign normally doesn't run even in the single digits. You know, we're normally invisible in the scheme of things. So what it says is that there are a lot of unhappy campers out there who are looking for something else. We see that in the poll numbers about Hillary and Donald, and we also see that in the 75% that are saying we not only have a right to vote as Americans, we have a right to know who we can vote for.
Let's see. Okay, so we have one more time, and I would like to also ask if there are any questions for Mr. Baraka. This time.
All right.
Go ahead.
Dr. Jill Stein, seeing as how both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are both the most despised candidates in U.S. presidential election history, and now that Trump and Clinton are actually tied in some polls, do you feel that the DNC made a calculative error by having Hillary Clinton as a Democratic nominee instead of Bernie Sanders?
I would say for more reasons than one. That was the wrong thing for the DNC to do. They should not have been colluding behind closed doors against their own rules with a particular candidate, as the emails showed that they had done, and also colluding with some members of the big media to essentially undermine and sabotage Bernie Sanders' campaigns, and to cast aspersions on it as a campaign that was a mess, that was atheist, characterized as atheist in certain religious areas of the country and so on. The waters were purposefully poisoned by the Democratic Party against Bernie Sanders, and that was wrong in its own right. I think it was clear Bernie Sanders was leading in all the polls in every head-to-head match, and he reflects really where American public opinion is at. We represent that same agenda, and I think the American people are owed the understanding that they have another shot at this. They have another way to stand up against this political system, both parties that have been throwing them under the bus. Thank you.
Yes.
Why did you feel it was important to spend some time in Austin yesterday? Well, I think a lot of candidates would have just come, straight here, straight to downtown. I think.
Speak to that.
Well, I think that it reflects the kind of commitment that Dr. Stein has to lifting up the experiences and the voices of the people who are the most marginalized in the society. And you could see the response from the community. They were very happy to see someone who was running for president who came to their community and seemed to be concerned about their plight. And this has been the response we have seen across this country. Very few of these candidates are willing to go to where the people are at and to see the conditions that people are facing and to engage the people in a respectful, intelligent conversation about how we can address the kind of issues that they're facing. Instead, what we see pandering, we see campaigns avoiding the issues, and we see, as a consequence, status quo politics. So this campaign is about real change. And it understands that we're not going to make fundamental change without the people. It understands that even when we walk into that White House, that's not going to be the end point, but the beginning point of transforming this society. So we are in this for the long haul, and I think that people are recognizing that we have a protracted struggle, and more people are willing to join us in this struggle.
I wonder, just on that note, Barack Obama comes from here, Hillary Clinton hails from here, you also hail from here. What do you think that it is about Chicago that is playing so well on the national stage? And do you think that in any way is jeopardized by what's going on here at global level, the future of that?
Interesting. Do you want to?
Well, I know
Also coming from Chicago.
I grew up in Chicago. I think one thing you get in Chicago is you get a good training in machine politics. Okay, so you become a very effective politician. We are cutting through that. This is not about traditional politics. It's about truth telling. It's about building something different. It's about trying to salvage, save democracy here in this country. So what we see is basically the politics of opportunism. And that is a politics that we reject, a politics that I think more and more of the American people are also rejecting.
And, on the flip side, there, as a native Chicagoan that has been out east for some time now, in the Boston area, I really saw the contrast of Midwest and sort of the sense of Midwestern community, the sort of frontier mindset that we're all working together and we all need each other, and just the friendliness of the community here. And what you have in Chicago in particular, I think, is that you have sort of the sophistication of the kind of the economy that centered on Chicago. So you have both this cosmopolitan awareness, at the same time that you have this baseline of just kind of down-home country friendliness. And it's a very powerful combination, and I think it just speaks to a lot of people. So it positions people from Chicago to be speaking to many of us. And just addressing something that came up a moment ago about sort of where we're going from here, I want to make the point that this is, I think we all know, this is a unique election. We've never seen anything like this. The largest block of voters now is neither Democratic nor Republican. People have broken free from a system they feel, is not serving them. We've never been in this kind of moment before. So it inherently creates a lot of possibility, especially if debates are opened up as the American people are asking for. And we point out that the number of young people locked into student loan debt, that's 43 million, and it's not just young people now because there's no way out, and we have, an aging cohort going into middle age and beyond now who cannot get out of this debt. The numbers they continue to grow. They don't shrink because once you go in, you don't get out. Or very few people do because the jobs aren't there and the debt is extremely predatory. This is a lot of very frustrated people. And as word gets out that there is one campaign that they can vote for that will actually fight to bail out the students like Democrats and Republicans bailed out Wall Street, the crooks, in fact, who crashed the economy. It's time to bail out the victims of that waste, fraud, and abuse on Wall Street. As that word gets out, that is a potentially transformative force. 43 million is a winning plurality in the presidential race. So, I say, hold on to your hat. Let democracy do its magic here. Let's allow a real discussion to take place. Let's empower the American voter to know who their choices are, and let's see what happens from there. It's really, the basis of democracy is a free and open press so that the American people can actually be educated and can be empowered to make the decisions of democracy.
What's your take on the homicide rate here? 500 plus people killed this year. What's your take?
Yes, my take is, it's not rocket science that when there is abject poverty, when there's hopelessness, when you don't have a school system that's really educating kids and providing a future for them, which is more serving as a school-to-prison pipeline, when there is no economic opportunity and people have to, have few choices but to engage in the underground drug economy in the midst of a war on drugs, a racist war on drugs, it's a real climate of hopelessness in which guns, unfortunately, take over. So in order to address the gun problem, we need to enact common sense gun control that the American people are calling for. That means getting the assault weapons off the street, ensuring that we have background checks, and holding dealers and manufacturers accountable for the irresponsible use of those weapons and the irresponsible distribution. They currently have a immunity, legal immunity for the consequences of their actions. So there are a number of steps we can take to reduce this gun crisis that we have, but we have to address this crisis of hopelessness and racism.
One other quick follow-up question. What's your take on stiffening penalties for people who have been convicted of gun crimes in the past?
You know, in my experience, stiffer penalties are not the effective solution here. You know, the real effective solution is to get down to the primary drivers here, which are poverty, desperation, lack of jobs. And then to stop, to stop the promotion of gun culture right now, which is actively promoted by those who profit from it.
Let me say a quick word on that too. I think some of this conversation around the issue of 70–80% of those young people who are unemployed. And when you look at 20 to 24, it only is reduced by a few percentage points. So if you're not willing to address the issues of poverty, of hopelessness, of despair, of austerity here in this city, then you're not really serious about trying to address the kind of violence that we see in this city. Look, oppressed people worldwide tend to have these kinds of issues. You know, up until just a few months ago, I was living in a city in South America, Cali, Colombia. And I can tell you that if that city had 500 homicides in 1 year, there'll be a celebration, because the rate is double that. So if we're not going to be serious about dealing with the issue of oppression, then, you know, we're not serious about really trying to tackle this. Because what's the implication? Do we want to militarize these communities? So if we're concerned about gun control, we are. We need to be concerned about gun control in Chicago. We need to be concerned about gun control worldwide, with the U.S. being the #1 manufacturer and exporter of guns around this globe.
And I'll just add one thing to that. Martin Luther King said that peace is not just the absence of violence, it is the presence of justice. And if we are to address this crisis of gun violence, we need to address the underlying injustices that are rampant in these very oppressed and disenfranchised communities. One of the things we call for in our campaign, aside from the right to a job and an emergency jobs creation program, as well as funding our schools and ensuring that every community has a high-quality public school system. In addition, we call for actually a Truth and Reconciliation Commission so that we can sit down and address this underlying crisis, of racism and the legacy of not only slavery, lynchings, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, etc. We need to sit down as a society right now, which has become a garrison state, in which we are all armed and ready to shoot with trigger fingers here. We need to address this climate of fear and begin to come together through a facilitated Truth and Reconciliation Commission that allows us to tell our stories, to understand our history, and to find our common ground as one human family on one small boat in which we are all going to sail together or sink together. So, you know, we are going to work to bring us on the same page.
Hi, yes, Marcus from VID. So piggybacking on the gun violence issue, I hail from the south side myself, where obviously we experience a lot of gun violence. I'm not sure if you heard of the story of Tyshawn Lee, but he was a young boy that was murdered due to gun violence, gang violence. But one thing that's not mentioned in mainstream media is that a lot of these issues stem from the problem of political corruption. And when you consider how in the Supreme Court case of Bob McDonald versus USA, the Supreme Court determined that you require clear quid pro quo to show political corruption. So different elected officials can receive gifts as long as it's not clearly shown that it's for a specific policy or bill being passed. What do you think it says about the state of the nation that we're more focused on increasing crimes for, say, gun violence, but not really addressing the inherent core issue that causes all of these problems to occur in the first place?
Exactly, and I think the same can be said for so many other issues.
Exactly.
And, you know, our expanding wars. What causes that serving exactly? Failed states, mass refugee migrations, worse terrorist threats. This policy is not working, but it's costing us more than half of our discretionary budget, almost half of our income taxes. You know, we need to go back to the drawing boards for a foreign policy that actually works. You know, but who's benefiting? You know, it's the weapons industry, which has an extremely powerful influence. I mean, they appear to be the only ones, you know, in fact, who are benefiting from this industry, because certainly democracy is not benefiting. We are not more secure. We're not stopping terrorism. We've not created democracies or women's rights or anything, you know, in the Middle East. Same is true for our healthcare system. You know, who's being served by Obamacare? This was a boondoggle for insurance and pharmaceutical companies, and we just saw an example of this with the EpiPen, where, you know, it's a $400 pen for $1 worth of medicine. So yes, there's a common denominator here. It's the power of lobbyists and big money. In our view, we need to get the money out and get the people back in to our political system so we can have a real democracy. That is not rocket science. We need publicly financed campaigns. We also need free access to the media to the airwaves for public interest causes. Campaigns should not have to cost billions of dollars. It's largely these costs that have been created due to the privatization of the public's airwaves. So there are common sense, simple solutions that can get the money out of politics, stop the revolving door, and actually re-engage the promise of democracy, which is essential if we are to solve any of these crises that are bearing down on us right now, whether it's the crisis of our economy, of our healthcare system, our school system, our environment, which is melting down around us, and international peace and security.
Thank you. Just wanted to remind members of the press that there is something very significant happening today connected to this issue of mass incarceration. What we're going to see today is one of the largest prison strikes in the history of this country. Prisoners whose humanity has been compromised for quite some time, and they are saying basically that they are humans and they want to be respected as humans, and that people in this society need to understand the kind of conditions that they face. So we have around the country today this massive prison strike, and we hope that they receive some degree of attention.
We're close it for questions. Thank you very much, and again, now my cards, if you want further coverage, please contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.